I stood frozen as I watched our neighborhood association president, Rebecca Carter, grab my sister Sophie's wheelchair and, either by accident or on purpose, shove it down the stairs from our porch. The wheels spun out of control as the chair tumbled, and my stomach dropped. "Well, that's a shame," Rebecca remarked, her voice dripping with feigned sympathy as she wiped her hands. She had no idea that I was a judge in a high-profile civil rights court. Her arrogance would soon come crashing down faster than her neighborhood's property values. The trouble had begun earlier that morning when I was helping Sophie get ready for her physical therapy. Since her accident, I'd converted my home office into a bedroom for her and built a temporary ramp so that she could easily access the house. That ramp, however, had become an eyesore to Rebecca. I lived in Maple Ridge for 8 years before Sophie moved in. The Homeowners Association, HOA, had always been strict, but things got out of hand when Rebecca took over as president 3 months ago. At first, she had nitpicked minor issues like the grass being too high or a trash can left out for an extra few minutes. But recently, she became obsessed with my temporary ramp. At the last HOA meeting, she declared, "That ramp is an eyesore. It's devaluing our properties, and it has to be removed immediately." She had said it with such a self-righteous tone, tapping her manicured nails as if the matter were the biggest issue in the neighborhood. I tried to reason with her, showing her the permits I had obtained for the temporary ramp and the documentation from the doctor outlining Sophie's need for it. But Rebecca wasn't interested in the facts. "Rules are rules," she said with a fake, sympathetic smile. "If Sophie needs a ramp so badly, maybe she should consider moving somewhere more suitable." I was barely holding back my anger, reminding myself that Sophie needed me calm. This morning, as I helped Sophie down the ramp and into the car, Rebecca appeared, walking briskly toward us with a clipboard in hand. 2 members of the HOA board trailed behind her, like loyal followers. "We're conducting an emergency inspection of your unapproved structure," she called out, her voice sugary sweet. I sighed. "We have a doctor's appointment." "This can wait, Rebecca." But she stepped in front of the car, blocking our way. "It won't take long. The board has voted to act on violations that impact the community's aesthetic," she said, emphasizing the word aesthetic, as if Sophie's wheelchair was somehow offending her delicate sensibilities. "I've already explained," I said, trying to stay patient. "We have the proper permits from the city." Rebecca interrupted. "Not approved by the HOA's Architectural Review Committee." She held up a paper. "This is a removal notice. You have 24 hours to take down the structure or face fines of $200 per day." I glanced at Sophie, who was clearly getting anxious. "We'll talk about this when I get back," I said, my voice tight. Rebecca didn't even flinch. "There's nothing to discuss. The ramp comes down or the fines begin. Maybe this will teach you to follow proper procedures next time." As I backed out of the driveway, I watched her take pictures of the ramp and measure it with a tape measure. Her smug satisfaction made my skin crawl. 3 hours later, after Sophie's doctor visit, we came home to find a crew of men dismantling the ramp and piling the pieces on the front lawn. Rebecca stood supervising, grinning. I slammed on the brakes and rushed out of the car. "What are you doing?" I demanded. Rebecca's smile didn't falter. "I'm enforcing the HOA's rules, as is my right as president. You were given notice, and the board has deemed this an immediate violation." I was beyond furious. "You've removed the only way for my sister to enter our home. How is she supposed to get inside now?" Rebecca shrugged, looking unconcerned. "That's not our problem. You should have thought about that before installing an unapproved structure." Sophie sat in the car, watching in shock. Neighbors had gathered around, some uncomfortable, but no one intervened. I gritted my teeth. "I need to get my sister inside," I said, "and then I'll deal with you." Rebecca glanced at her watch. "My work here is done anyway. Consider this a lesson in following the HOA's rules." As she turned to leave, I helped Sophie into her wheelchair, but then realized the problem. With no ramp, the only way to get her inside was up a set of 6 steps. "Rebecca," I called after her, "you can't just leave us like this. How is Sophie supposed to get in?" Rebecca sighed dramatically. "I suppose we could help you this once," she said, gesturing to the 2 men who had dismantled the ramp. "Assist them, please." What happened next was infuriating. Instead of gently helping Sophie up the steps, Rebecca pushed past the men, grabbed the wheelchair handles herself, and began attempting to lift it up the stairs. She clearly had no idea how to handle a wheelchair. Sophie gripped the armrests tightly, her face filled with fear. "Please be careful," she whispered. Rebecca ignored her warning, impatient with the slow pace. As she tried to tilt the wheelchair back, she lost control. It lurched sideways and then tipped backward, sending Sophie crashing to the ground. Everything slowed as I watched Sophie tumble down the 3 steps, the wheelchair landing hard on its side. Sophie screamed as she fell. I rushed to her side, heart racing. "Sophie, are you okay?" She was in tears, shaking, clutching her arm. "I'm fine," she sobbed, but I could tell she was in pain. Rebecca stood at the top of the stairs, looking annoyed. "Well, that was unfortunate," she said, as if she had just spilled a drink. "This is why unapproved structures are a liability." I couldn't believe my ears. "You just pushed my sister down the stairs, and you're concerned about liability?" I checked Sophie for injuries and found that her arm was bruising badly. She winced when I touched it. "We need to go to the hospital," I told her quietly. Rebecca backed away, brushing it off. "I didn't push anyone. She fell because that wheelchair isn't designed for stairs." This just proves my point about needing proper accommodations. I was left speechless, filled with rage. My neighbor, Mrs. Harris, who had witnessed the entire thing, came over to help. "I saw what happened," she said softly. "That wasn't an accident. It was reckless." "I know," I replied, my voice tight. "Can you help me get Sophie back to the car? She needs medical attention." Once Sophie was safely in the car, I turned to Rebecca, who was already walking away with the HOA board members in tow. "This isn't over," I called after her. Rebecca smirked. "Actually, it is. And if you try to put that ramp back up without approval, the fines will double." On the way to the hospital, my mind was racing. For years, I kept my job as a judge separate from my life in the neighborhood, but Rebecca had crossed a line. I was done hiding. The doctor confirmed that Sophie had a sprained wrist and bruised ribs. "She's lucky," he said. "Falls from wheelchairs can cause serious injuries, especially with her condition." Sophie squeezed my hand as they wrapped her wrist. "It's not your fault," she whispered. I couldn't shake the feeling of guilt, but I knew what I had to do. It was time to put an end to Rebecca's cruelty. That evening, I received a letter from Rebecca apologizing for her actions. "I never realized the harm I was causing," she wrote. "Rules without compassion aren't justice. They're just cruelty." But Sophie said it best. Rebecca thought she was pushing me down those stairs, but she was really setting herself up for her own downfall. A few days later, the HOA board voted to reinstate our temporary ramp and issued a formal apology. Rebecca resigned immediately, citing personal reasons. Soon after, federal agents arrived at her home with a warrant, uncovering years of financial misconduct. Rebecca had been funneling HOA funds into personal accounts, disguising them as administrative costs. She was sentenced to prison for financial fraud, with major fines for her violation of disability rights. The neighborhood underwent a transformation. The new HOA board established a fund for accessibility improvements, and Sophie's recovery was supported by our community. In the end, justice didn't just come a courtroom. It came to a community that had been changed for the better. In the end, what Rebecca failed to understand was that rules, when enforced without compassion, only cause harm. Justice, however, isn't just about following protocols. It's about fairness, empathy, and doing what's right. Her actions set in motion not only a personal downfall, but a community-wide transformation. The support we received, especially from neighbors who stood by us, proved that people can rise above selfishness and cruelty. For Sophie and me, this ordeal became a turning point, one where integrity triumphed over arrogance. In the face of adversity, we found strength, and the community grew stronger, united in justice.